Welcome to our Sister Mary Sorosiak Lecture series, which began in 2011. We're having a discussion today about actually how many lectures we've had, but with COVID we weren't quite sure of the head count off the top of our heads. But anyway, I want to thank you for coming out on this beautiful day and resisting the need to do, yard work or just bask in the sunshine. And I know some people were worried about the eclipse traffic, so we didn't have a problem with that after all. Well, this is a bittersweet event for us this year, as Sister Jane Mary passed away on March 17th at the age of 94. She was a constant presence in Alverno's studio, working on her murals almost until the end, and was a treasure to our community at Lourdes and beyond. Feel free to drive through campus to see some of her inspiring ceramic murals, and especially you've got some really huge ones on this building itself, and were some of the first ones that she did. I would like to thank our lecture series sponsors, George and Vicki Breimer, as well as the Sisters of St. Francis, the Lourdes University Board of Trustees, Dr. and Mrs. William Bissett, and our Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, Dr. Kate Butel, for helping to make this happen. In addition, I would like to thank the Franciscan Center, our IT department, and our Public Relations department. This year, we're featuring in Mary Sabin's words, a well-loved Toledo treasure, Larry Nichols, who will share his stories about his years as curator at the Toledo Museum of Art. After Larry's presentation, there will be time for a brief Q&A. And just to let you know, we have some multi-things going on in this building today, and we have a full house. And so after the Q&A, we will retire to the conference rooms A and B, which are right down to the right, and we'll have a reception, and you are all welcome to stay for the reception. And if you want to do any one-on-one questions with Larry at that point, you can do that as well. So after you leave the theater, just take a right there. To begin our program, I'd like to introduce George Breimer, who will provide us with a brief explanation about Sister Jane Mary's influence on him. So George, if you'd like to come up.
Thank you, Aaron. My meeting Sister Jane Mary had a bit of serendipity to it. I was a 50-something non-traditional college student who needed an art class to round out the last summer semester of my undergraduate degree. Sister Jane Mary was almost 80, called off the bench to come in and teach a calligraphy class in the summer at the last minute. There I was, a straight-A student, desperate to atone for my dismal high school academic record by getting through Lourdes with a 4.0. And there was Sister Jane Mary, a notorious taskmaster who often boasted that she never gave A's. We were a match made in heaven. During that 8-week class, Sister Jane Mary did something that no other teacher had even tried. She convinced me that I had some artistic ability. I always thought that being an artist required perfectionism. And here I was taking a calligraphy class. We used ink, and you were always one pen stroke away from starting over. But she convinced me that art was about taking chances and sometimes making mistakes, and that even when you did make mistakes, you could incorporate those mistakes into the art and make it even better. So she challenged me, and it was a wonderful experience. On the last day of the semester, she took the class on a tour of the Lourdes campus to show us all the artwork. She showed us all the art that Mother Adelaide had brought back from her travels. She showed us the mosaics that she had done here on campus, which are on just about every building you see when you're here. She was most proud to show off the artwork on campus that her former students had produced. After that semester, Vicki and I would often visit her in the studio where she worked up until just a few months ago. And she would always show us the project she was working on. She would show us photos of her latest installation. If it was the afternoon, she would invite us for tea and cookies, which was a daily event. And she would never miss an opportunity to remind me how lucky I was that she gave me an A. I will miss her for the rest of my life. We wanted to do something, Vicki and I, that helped alert people to the abundance of work on this campus that Sister Jane Mary did. So we talked to Erin back in 2010, and this art lecture series was born. Sister loved making art, she loved teaching art, and she loved talking about art. So here we are. So I know you're going to enjoy this afternoon, and thank you very much for coming out.
I guess I'm a little remiss. I didn't introduce myself, and I'm Erin, who he's talking about. I'm Erin Palmer-Savoy. I'm chair of the art department here at Lourdes University. And it's been a privilege to work on this lecture series since it came into being in 2011. When we started talking about this lecture series and talking about Larry Nichols, I just thought it would be kind of nice to have, another introduction into the work Larry's done. And so I'd asked Adam Levine if he would come over and do that. He was more than happy to do that. So Adam will be introducing Larry, but please welcome Adam Levine, the Edward Drummond and Florence Scott Libby President, Director, and CEO of the Toledo Museum of Art.
Thank you. Take it out because I'm tall. Thank you, Erin. Thank you, Bill Bissett, for everything that you do for our community and for Lourdes University. And thank you to the Primers for supporting this lecture series. It's so important to bring people together in the service of advancing knowledge, understanding, and supporting the folks in this community who do such incredible work in support of the arts. And certainly, there is no one more distinguished. There might be people as distinguished, but there is no one more distinguished than Larry Lawrence W. Nichols. So I was asked by Erin to talk a little bit about why we decided to make Larry the Curator Emeritus of the Toledo Museum of Art. And the joking answer is because I had to give him a shorter title than the William Hutton Senior Curator of European and American Painting and Sculpture before 1900. But in fact, as I think many of you will know, emeritus is an honorific, which strangely suggests that the work is done. So very inappropriate in this case, because I gave Larry a title and then gave him a job, The Brilliance of Caravaggio, 4 Paintings in Focus, which is open at the Toledo Museum of Art. By show of hands, who's seen the exhibition thus far? Now this is a good audience. Gold star to all of you. But you do have a week plus left, so go back, because if you do not see it again in the next week, the likelihood is that these pictures will not be reunited for more than a decade, because indeed it has been that long since they were last together. An incredible coup to have this exhibition, and a reflection of your speaker, because these loans would not have been given. Of course, it has to do with the quality of our collection and our ability to bargain with our peers, offering them a loan in return for a loan. But really, a lot of these loans came in simply because Larry is so adored by his colleagues, so respected in the field, and because he has been such a help to so many. So we had never had a curator emeritus before, and it was only fitting that after Larry's distinguished service, not just to the Toledo Museum of Art, but as you'll hear in his formal bio, to all of art history, in particular to his primary field of European art, that he should be granted our first emeritus title. So with that, to the formal introduction. Lawrence W. Nichols retired in June 2021 as the Toledo Museum of Art's William Hutton Senior Curator of European and American Painting and Sculpture before 1900, at which time he was named the museum's first Curator Emeritus. He joined the Toledo Museum of Art in 1992 after serving as Associate Curator of the John G. Johnson Collection at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, which he did from 1986 to 1992. A specialist in Northern Baroque painting, his book, The Paintings of Hendrik Goltzius, 1558 to 1617, a monograph and catalog raisonné, was published in March 2013. And for those of you who have seen it, some quick math will tell you that he began at the Philadelphia Museum in 1986. It was published in 2013, so 37 years later. I think he wrote about 100 pages every one of those years. It is a doorstop of a book, an incredible feat of scholarship. Larry took his PhD from Columbia University and his bachelor's from Dartmouth College. He now remembers this because I pointed out in every introduction, but his first catalog ever was while as a student at Dartmouth College of Giovanni Piranesi's Prince, and I have a copy of that. I believe the date's 1977, if I'm not mistaken. So I'm a real Nichols fanboy. Larry curated numerous exhibitions at the Toledo Museum of Art, including, of course, the brilliance of Caravaggio, 4 paintings in focus, Franz Hall's portraits, A Family Reunion, Manet, Portraying Life, Van Gogh, Van Gogh, Wheatfields, and Hendrik Goltzius, Dutch master drawings, prints, and paintings, among so many others, but I know you recognize some fan favorites in that cohort. He's been responsible for a number of important acquisitions, including works by Halls, Guercino, Chardin, Delacroix, Géricault, and Vuillard, again among many, many others. And from 1995, he served as the curatorial liaison to the Georgia Wells Apollo Society, the TMA's art acquisition group, which has one of its events this afternoon. So I am going to have to shuttle over before his lecture is complete, unfortunately, but it's because of Larry. So Nichols continues to serve on the Old Master Paintings Vetting Committee for the European Fine Art Fairs held in Maastricht in the Netherlands each March. That is one of the ultimate achievements you can achieve in your field, to be asked to serve on the vetting committee to make sure that the works on display at the most prestigious art fair in the world are not only of the highest quality, but in fact, bona fides examples of what they proclaim to be. In addition, he served on the art advisory panel of the Commissioner of Internal Revenue, and he chaired the International Indemnity Program panel of the National Endowment for the Arts from 2016 to 2020. So it's one thing to proclaim Larry as so important to the Toledo Museum of Art, but you can see that the national and international accolades underscore just how impressive this individual is. He was the Paul Mellon Visiting Senior Fellow at the Center for Advanced Study of the Visual Arts, CASVA as it's known in our field, at the National Gallery of Art in 2017, and a visiting scholar at the Getty Research Institute in 2010, as well as at the Clark Art Institute in Williamstown, Massachusetts in 1999. Please join me in welcoming Larry Nichols, who will be your guide through an incredible tour of his career and the paintings he acquired at, and painting, sculptures, and other works he acquired at and for the Toledo Museum of Art. Larry.
Thank you, Adam, for more than your kind words. That was something to hear. I also want to acknowledge the honor it is for me to be the speaker today, this year especially, for the Sister Jane Mary Sorosiak Lecture Series. And for you all for coming inside on this glorious afternoon, my thanks to you all. I begin my remarks this afternoon with 3 quotes, one from the Bible, and 2 from former colleagues at the Toledo Museum of Art. The words of the preacher, the son of David, king of Jerusalem, "Vanity of vanities, saith the preacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity." Ecclesiastes 1 through 2. As the TMA Curator of European Paintings, and the title of my lecture is one and the same as the individual presently addressing you, I straightaway acknowledge, therefore, that by definition, though nonetheless deliberately, this talk is more than a little tinged with vanity. I beg your indulgence. Quote number 2. Curators recommend, directors decide. A truism voiced to me by Kurt Luckner, former curator of antiquity at the TMA, with whom I had the honor of overlapping for but a few short years prior to his premature death in 1995. I would add as a coda to Kurt's observation, and art trustee committees approve. I always conceptualized one aspect of my role as curator to be making the life of a director extraordinarily difficult by presenting a plethora of stunning acquisition ideas. And I do believe I succeeded in this regard to the 6 directors that I worked with during my 28-year tenure at the TMA from late 1992 to mid-2021. David W. Stedman, Roger Max Berkowitz, Don Bacigalupi, Brian P. Kennedy, John Stanley, and none other than Adam Levine. And lastly, quote number 3. I really don't know who it is by. I just know it is a painting of great quality. An uncannily honest and remarkable sentiment expressed to me by William Hutton, who preceded me as European Paintings Curator, when the two of us were standing in the museum's great gallery in front of this painting from the mid-1630s. It was bought during Bill's years as a work by the Neapolitan painter Bernardo Cavallino, but subsequently its attribution has been upgraded to Artemisia Gentileschi. Bill was quality, and he was a vital role model for me in my service to the TMA. As this painting is on view in one of the museum's current exhibitions, as Adam noted, this moment affords me the opportunity to remind one and all to view the museum's show, The Brilliance of Caravaggio, 4 Paintings in Focus, which closes 1 week from today. The Toledo Museum of Art is the internationally renowned institution that it is today due to the foresight and munificence of Edward Drummond Libby, the founder of the museum, and his wife, Florence Scott Libby. At their deaths in 1925 and 1938, respectively, they had established hefty funds earmarked exclusively for acquisitions. It is not for nothing that when one combines Bill Hutton's and yours truly's years at the TMA, the number 63 years, it is more than half the age of the museum itself. One of the first acquisitions made with the Libby Fund was this utter gem purchased in 1928, Degas' pastel, The Dancers. Prior to proposing an acquisition, I always weighed in my mind's eye, would the proposal quality stand up to this benchmark that you see reproduced on the screen now? It was a valuable challenge that I routinely demanded of myself to answer truthfully. Quality, therefore, was the primary TMA guiding principle for me for any acquisition proposal. I stood by a creed that I established once I fully grasped the character of the TMA collection. It is better to do without than to settle for second rate. Of great importance, too, condition, that is, the state of preservation of the object under consideration. The further back in time one goes, that is, the older an object is, the more leniency one might have in this criterion, but again, the bar is quite high on this factor for the Toledo collection. So, what were the dynamics at play as I went into the art market with the aim of augmenting the already outstanding TMA collection when I came here in 1992? Though art dealers and auction houses love to assert that the 2 Ds, death and divorce, will always bring art to the market, and I don't deny this, The fact remains that over the decades that I have served as curator, and I began in the mid-'80s at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, fewer and fewer great things have become available. Moreover, prices have only risen, with the result that the TMA's buying power, its capacity to remain a significant player in the art market, has faced intense challenges, to say the least. In truth, I recognize that there were really only two ways to pitch a painting that I felt passionate about. I could make the "this contribution is filling a void" approach, or I could take the strength to strength argument. Both were valid, and both worked. An instance of the former, the "this contributes to filling a void" premise. I show you the Danish painter, and I don't speak Danish, so I'm going to brutalize the actual pronunciation, Christian Schellerup Kupke's The Bay of Naples of 1843. This picture was the first acquisition the TMA made after my arrival in this wonderful city. My reasoning for pursuing this painting were legion. I cannot tell a lie. New arrival Larry recognized that the Francophile character of the then 4 19th century galleries needed some shaking up, shall we say, and this was a work that would commence to address that need while simultaneously making a statement. It was the first Danish painting to enter the collection, and it made a telling pairing with one of Hutton's greatest acquisitions, the Danish sculptor Berthold Thorvaldsen's Count Arthur Partocki of about 1830. I show you the two works as they have been displayed since 1993. In 1984, the National Gallery in London mounted a most influential exhibition, Danish Paintings, The Golden Age. Voila, an image of the exhibition catalog cover at left. I was fortunate enough to have seen and studied the show in London, which situated me a decade later to have some confidence in assessing 19th century Danish painting. How did I locate Kupke's The Bay of Naples? Therein a circumstance which I took as a lesson for the remainder of my career. Stay out of elevators when visiting art dealers. In the winter of '93, on a trip to New York to visit dealers, I was on the top floor of an Upper East Side townhouse at Newhouse Gallery. At what was to be the conclusion of my visit, the dealer said something like, "Thank you for coming my way, and let me know if I can send you any further information on any of the pictures I have shown you." And he proceeded to direct me to the elevator, at which point I declined, saying, "No, let's take the stairs." And on my way down, out of the corner of my eye, I spied Kupke's painting. I right then and there prolonged my time with the dealer, put the canvas on reserve for the TMA, and the rest is history. 7 years later, in 2000, due to the profoundly important generosity of the museum's collectors organization, the now named George Orwell's Apollo Society, presently 38 years in existence and going strong. If this membership group is of interest to you, know that all are welcome. Contact the museum's development office for specific information. In 2000, due to this Apollo Society's largesse, a second Danish painting entered the collection, Wilhelm Hammershøi's Interior of a Courtyard, Strandgade 30 of 1899. The painter and his wife took up residence on the second floor of this building, where you see the open window in this engaging, mysterious composition. I have visited this inner courtyard of this 17th century structure, which was a memorable experience. So too was my first encounter with the picture itself. After noting the painting in the 1999-2000 exhibition catalog of a show in Treviso, Italy, where it was listed as private collection, I sought out the work and located it with a Paris dealer, Nordisk Gallery. On April 3rd, 2000, I studied the painting on a visit to the dealer, an encounter I shan't forget. The dealer, a new mother, was clutching and comforting a screeching newborn as we discussed the canvas. I truly enjoyed every howl from the infant and was totally entranced by the haunting and telling emptiness of the composition. But the woman was totally beside herself and was erroneously convinced the sale was doomed. 6 years later, in 2016, the museum was able to acquire a third Danish painting, Laurits Andersen Ring's 1891 Rooks in a Field, the wherewithal in part being funds given in memory of Sarnoff A. Mednick. The painting was called to my attention in March 2015 by Peter Hecht, a professor of art history at the University of Utrecht, who I first met in 1983 when I was living in that Dutch city doing dissertation research. After a protracted review, the picture was finally sent over from an Amsterdam dealer and arrived at the museum in February 2016. Brian Kennedy saw it not long after I got it to a gallery wall, and he remarked, quote, "There is no question, it has to stay." It was approved by the trustee art committee the following month. A year in all, such things can take time. If my having the museum acquire Kupka's The Bay of Naples, which ultimately resulted in 2 further pictures being added to the collection from the Danish National School, was an instance of filling the void approach. The very next painting that I had the museum purchase, which you see here at left, was a case of the strength-to-strength argument. In 1983, the TMA had acquired Delacroix's The Return of Christopher Columbus, which I show at right, and I counseled in 1994 that Delacroix's Botsaris surprises the Turkish camp and falls fatally wounded of about 1860 to 62 should also get a museum accession number. So, why was I hell-bent on a second Delacroix? Never too much of a good thing to begin with, but the primary raison d'etre was the function of this painting. It is a sketch for a larger painting left unfinished at the artist's death in 1863. The collection possesses a handful of 18th century Italian preparatory oil sketches, but no heretofore equivalent in the 19th century was on the walls. This genius of French Romanticism was a miraculous magician with the brush, no more so than in these rapidly executed, spontaneously created compositions. The rendering captures a battle of the Greek War of Independence. The leader of the victorious Greeks, Botsaris, falls in the center of the image. Delacroix amazingly and assuredly describing his countenance with but a single vertical stroke of pink paint. Quite remarkable. That's in the lower right on the screen. The painting found me. New York dealer Richard Feigen, who always thought fondly of the TMA ever since 1988, during director Roger Mandel's tenure, when the museum bought our fabulous Hans Beckmann. Feigen notified me that he had this Delacroix. I went and saw it, and after subsequently lengthy negotiations about the price, I remember well receiving a phone call from him on a Saturday morning while I was pushing my me-powered push lawnmower. The deal was sealed. One of the most amusing set of circumstances surrounding an acquisition that I had at the TMA, that had the TMA make, involved this painting of 1819 to 20 by the French artist Achille Etna Michelin, thought to render a landscape near Cava, a scene to be found south of Naples near Salerno. Now, to be fair to my counterparts in the art world, dealers of old master paintings not infrequently have stock for extended periods of time. A sale takes the confluence of the right work of art, noticed and appreciated by a buyer, be it a museum or a private party, at the right price. And for this all to come together, it can take time. But in 2005, when I first fell in love with this sublime landscape at the stand of a London dealer at the European Fine Arts Fair in Maastricht, known by the acronym TAFAF, and when I only adored it more when I saw it again at the fair in 2006, and again in 2007, and again in 2009, and again in 2010. I had reason to believe the dealer would deal. All the more so since I had records of what price he had been asking over the 6-year period, and he did not. I shared with him his variety of asking prices over the half-decade, and then noted that I wanted to put the painting in the horse race that is the offerings a curator makes to the membership of the aforementioned TMA collectors group, the Georgia Wells Apollo Society, in the hopes that the work would be voted in. And for 2/3 of what he had first quoted, Michelin's landscape near Cava was the organization's 2010 generous gift to the TMA. If the acquisition of this picture was, as I said, one of the most amusing, the acquisition of this painting was one of the most gratifying. For it too was presented by me at the same 2010 object selection event, but the canvas by Michelin just considered carried the evening, which meant that Odelon Redon's landscape, dating to the years 1870 to 75, which you see here, would have to be returned to the London dealer from whence it had come to the TMA. Simultaneously ebullient because of the Michelin and despondent due to the Redon, as I was leaving the room in which I had made my presentation and the vote had just been conducted, I was stopped by Apollo Society member Tom Bentley. He told me not to let the painting depart Toledo, that he would get back to me in a matter of days. I'll never forget it. 5 days later, Friday, May 21st, 2010, I get a phone call while I'm in the Hotel Boulderado in Boulder, Colorado, where I was for a wedding that would take place the following day. It was Tom Bentley. He said he had corralled enough folk to pony up for the Redon to jumpstart its acquisition. As the credit line in our label for the painting reads, purchased with funds given by Thomas N. and Jill W. Bentley, Ann W. Hartman and Frank Snug, and Dr. and Mrs. James G. Raven. As I've related, acquisitions were the result of intentional searches as well as the sheer serendipity of a chance encounter. And so held true for what are probably the two most important additions I made to the collection of the TMA, Jean-Simeon Chardin's pair of paintings, The Washerwoman and the Woman Drawing Water at the Cistern, and Franz Halse's von Kampen family portrait in a landscape. I begin with the Chardins, acquired in 2006. Believe me, being a curator encompasses an accumulation of experiences. In the autumn of 1979, after completing 2 years of my graduate school coursework, but before the long haul of researching and writing a dissertation, I commenced a year-long National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship in the European Paintings Department at the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. Yes, we must support the NEA. Supremely, my first week that September coincided with the installation of a retrospective on the paintings of the 18th century French artist Chardin, an exhibition also displayed in Paris and at the Cleveland Museum of Art. Voila the cover illustration of the catalog with Chardin's Le Panier de Fraises, c'est-à-dire his basket of strawberries, with, on the right, an image of this very painting, announced just this past February 29th as having been acquired by the Louvre. Over 12 weeks, I studied that show daily. It was the first exhibition for which I wrote a review that was published. I sensed, if elusively, that I got to know the artist's work quite well. I want to think very well. 2 self-portraits executed in pastel exist, one in Paris, the other in the Art Institute of Chicago, which you see here. A painter of still lifes and genre scenes, as well as a few portraits. My favorite anecdote about the man is that he is purported to have responded to a highly made-up woman who asked that he paint her portrait, "But Madame, you already are painted." The TMA collection of 18th century French paintings was already quite strong, with excellent examples from the hands of Watteau, Boucher, and Fragonard. Yet our holdings cried out for Chardin. And in fact, the museum's photo files reveal that such a search had been going on since at least 1952. I set to work almost immediately, and from my very first month, December 1992, until the purchase of our pendants in 2006, I was in constant contact with the art market about pictures available or that potentially could be available. On 2 occasions, the first as early as my second month on the job, I had Chardins brought to the museum only to be returned after serious review of all the pertinent issues. The breakthrough came in March 2005. At a curators conference in New York, one of the 2 experts at the time in the world on Chardin, Philip Conisby, rest in peace, curator of French painting at the National Gallery of Art in Washington, told me he was aware of 2 previously unknown paintings in mint condition that had surfaced in France. They had been identified by a dealer in Paris in a private collection in Lyon, where they had been since prior to the French Revolution. I contacted the Parisian dealer who had access to the canvases. By the outset of June, he told me that he was free to offer them to Toledo. Serious consideration began. I remember doing little else for months but researching these pictures. And then I saw the paintings. As I wrote in my work of art of consideration recommendation form, and I quote myself there, on 15, 16, 19, and again on 20 September 2005, I dwelled with women drawing water at the cistern and the washerwoman in natural light at the Gallery of Eric Turquin in Paris, while before and after spending hours, as I've done on numerous occasions over the years, in the galleries of the Louvre examining the 33, now 34, paintings by him in that collection. Among my notes is the jotting, shocking summary. The condition, the state of preservation is uncanny to the point of being hard to fathom. One attempts to rationalize what's wrong with them, and an answer is not forthcoming. During these days, I also visited the Parisian home of the other recognized expert on Chardin, he who had organized the 1979 exhibition that I lived with in Boston, Pierre Rosenberg, emeritus curator and emeritus director of the Louvre, who blessed the attributions of these unpublished works. Later that month, I recommended to Bacigalupi and a member that we have the paintings brought to the museum. Don consented and garnered art committee approval for the pair to be sent to the TMA. In less than 2 weeks, the canvases were on our walls. Susan Palmer, then head of the museum docents, knew well that I'd been dreaming of Chardin for the TMA for over a decade, and I will never forget going to her office, telling her to drop what she was doing and follow me, and leading her up the back stairs to the Levis galleries to see the 2 paintings. Bacigalupi and I met in front of the canvases within a week of their arrival. Frankly, the works sold themselves, and Don knew it straight away. We presented them to the art committee in late October. In November, Bacigalupi did his thing. He negotiated down the price with the dealer, and then, in his inimitable communication modality, he didn't tell me of his success. On the 7th of December, I learned from the dealer, who called me to congratulate me on the conclusion of negotiations. News to me, I distinctly remember joyfully responding. Having come to us in simple modern travel frames, which I just showed you, shortly thereafter I located proper 18th century frames in which you see Chardin's pair of paintings displayed today. On the 7th of July, 2010, a colleague of mine from the Royal Academy of Arts and I had an appointment with an art dealer in London on Old Burlington Street. The purpose of our visit to this locale was to venture to the second floor office of an art broker by the name of Robert Holden. My English colleague, Mary Stevens, and I were in the midst of organizing the exhibition that would be on view in Toledo and London in 2 years' time, Manet Portraying Life. I can well imagine many of you saw this exhibition. We aimed to procure the loan of this portrait by Manet, Fanny Klaus. That, alas, never came to pass. The portrait was acquired by the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford in 2012. But when we entered Holden's office, I was utterly agog and ultimately totally useless to Marianne as she described our enterprise. The reason for my near speechless shock was what was on the wall smack next to the Manet. You can see a mere segment of the large canvas at right in this image. As the three of us took seats around the table with the pungent hyacinths, I purposely chose the chair facing the wall you see here, for there was hanging a well-known family portrait by the Dutch 17th century artist Frans Hals. And as it was in an art dealer's gallery, it could only mean one thing. It was to be had. Our discussion about the Manet ended, and we Manet exhibition organizers departed the gallery. We had a brief planning meeting discussion on the curb in front of the building and said our goodbyes for the day. Marianne headed off, and once she was around the corner, I proceeded to telephone the dealer I had said thank you and goodbye to but moments ago. I asked him for an appointment for the very next morning, to which he consented, though doubtless he was quite baffled and uncertain what in the world I had in mind. I informed him the next day of the Toledo Museum of Art's ongoing research for a great, not merely good, painting by Hals. To convey our seriousness, I communicated that in July 1999, 11 years previously, the TMA had been the underbidder at auction of the tremendous and not inexpensive Hals portrait, quite coincidentally bought by the Cleveland Museum of Art, though neither institution knew the other was bidding as well. A week later, we're now in the middle of July, when back at the museum, I called the dealer and put a reserve on the picture. Reserve meaning give us first refusal, don't sell it without letting us know. I also sent an email to the recently named director, Brian Kennedy, who was to start the 1st of September, to inform him of the rather astounding opportunity I had chanced upon. His response the very next day was memorable. "Larry, of course I know the painting. It's a great one indeed," he told me. He continued, "But I don't work at the TMA yet." Not long thereafter, I contacted the reigning dean of Hals Scholarship at the time, then 90-year-old Professor Emeritus Seymour Slive of Harvard. He had published the painting in his catalog of the oeuvre of Hals, but I needed to learn his thoughts regarding our potential acquisition of the canvas. His response, quote, "Wow, I would get it. I urge you to get it. The painting has great merit, not to be overlooked. You get a whole family, 9 portraits, not just a single head. It's a terrific painting, very sympathetic," end quote. I had a 1-to-1 scale photo blow-up of the painting made and installed it in the museum's great gallery, as if it were the painting itself, with the 16 other Baroque pictures on view in the space. I brought Kennedy to see it. Less than 2 weeks into his new job, he would tellingly remark, "The only issue is funding." To complicate matters, in the autumn that year, I had a 3-month study leave at the Getty Research Institute in LA, and so had to conduct the necessary ongoing constant communications with the dealer away from my TMA office. However, by late January 2011, the picture was under our roof and installed in the Great Gallery. Within a few months, funding allocated, the painting was ours. I very much want to acknowledge the strong support that my former curator colleague, Carolyn Putney, gave to this acquisition. Along the way, during research, a Dutch colleague kindly let it be known that he had identified the names of the sitters in the family and had biographical information about them. It already had been known that the now Toledo canvas was a fragment of a larger composition, cut at some undetermined point, likely already in the 17th or perhaps 18th centuries. For some unknown reason, probably condition issues is my hypothesis. All of the above led me to collaborate with a colleague at the Musée des Beaux-Arts in Brussels, which owns a section of the original full composition, to prepare an exhibition held in 2018-19 in Toledo, Brussels, and Paris on Hals's 4 surviving family portraits, which afforded us the opportunity to bring together the 3 surviving pieces of this impressive painting. Easily recognizable, the Great Gallery of the TMA. Presently, I want to tell you about the climatic, that is, the environmental conditions of my second encounter with Luca Giordano's The Liberation of St. Peter, which can be seen in this image all the way to the right, which entered the collection in 2014. I show you in full this painting, the largest old master picture in the collection. Brian Kennedy and I first saw the work at TAFOF in Holland in March 2012. To keep our interest percolating, the London dealer offering the work, Patrick Mathieson, paid us a visit here in Toledo that autumn. On the 21st of January 2013, I studied the painting in a warehouse in London. The 21st of January 2013. A few days ago, with the magic of the World Wide Web, I consulted the weather conditions that day in London. It was 32 degrees Fahrenheit, cold. Along with the dealer Patrick Mathieson, sporting a fur hat, with me that day in the warehouse was Mrs. Carol Ann Monica Lenz Nichols. She would be the babe it left, and she is the one who still reminds me to this day how bitterly cold she was in that warehouse. Protracted research resulted in the painting only arriving at the TMA 18 months later in July 2014, and within a month the deal was finally accomplished. No, the Louvre is not deaccessioned Theodore Géricault's Raft of the Medusa, and it therefore most assuredly is not on display at the TMA. But the great early 19th century French Romantic painter's magnum opus was invoked on the 25th of October 2018, when I saw his Boy Giving Oats to an Unhitched Horse at the fair in New York on the stand of the Parisian dealer Eric Cotelin, which you see here in the center of this image on one of the walls of the dealer's booth, and more closely in this image. A painting by Géricault had been on TMA's wish list for decades, and I was quite enthused to have come upon this offering. A former fellow assistant curator at the Philadelphia Museum of Art with a specialty in 19th century French painting, Colin Bailey, now director of the Morgan Library and Museum, was at the fair too, and I sought him out for his thoughts on the work. His rather witty and certainly pithy response was simply, "The Raft of the Medusa is not available." I love it. 4 months later, at the annual fair in the Netherlands, this time with Brian Kennedy, I was entranced once again by the extremely well-preserved canvas. Having an asking price well above the threshold at which a director can act without the approval of the TMA Trustee Art Committee, Kennedy, though he immensely admired the picture, said we had to let it go. Remember my quote number 2 from the outset of my lecture: curators recommend, directors decide. Dejected at the end of a full day of looking, I followed Brian to a cafe within the fair itself, and we each ordered small beers. Curiously, he asked me about the ones that got away, meaning what paintings had I tried for one reason or another, simply didn't come TMA way. It was an overwhelmingly easy question for me to answer, if not without a wince. I I told him about two paintings, which I will show you. In my very first year at the TMA, 1993, Jacques-Louis David's portrait of the Comtesse Vélin XIV and her daughter was offered to the museum by a London dealer. I knew then, and I still know now, that this is a very, very major painting. But a convergence of factors. Number one, I was, as it were, a freshman at the museum. Number two, a painting by David was already in the collection. And three, the price tag was not a small one. Sadly rendered the matter a non-starter. That painting was snapped up by the National Gallery London, which comes as no surprise to me, and offered some recompense, and still does, I hasten to add. The very next year, 1994, this painting, having mortality, not just that of fish, but human mortality as its subject, Francesco Goya's haunting, mesmerizing, positively tremendous still life with bream was offered to the TMA by a dealer in Paris, where I studied it in awe. It is one of a series of 12 paintings, all still lifes, all of dead animals, that the painter created and with which the artist decorated his dining room. Others are in the Louvre, the Prado in Madrid, and on loan to the Metropolitan. I tried to make my case for this painting, forcefully, but with all due respect, I can only state that my superior at the time simply did not understand the meaning and power of this work of art. I shared with a college acquaintance, George Shackelford, then curator of European paintings at the Museum of Fine Arts, Houston, that this Goya was available. Speedily, it was acquired by that fine institution. Go to Houston tomorrow and see it for yourself. You'll never forget it. And by the way, it would be this George Shackelford, now deputy director of the Kimball Art Museum in Fort Worth, who most kindly facilitated the loan of Caravaggio's The Card Sharps to the TMA exhibition with us for one more week, the brilliance of Caravaggio. And then I told Brian, you'll remember we're having small beers at the cafe inside the fair, that within the hour, Géricault's Boy Giving Oats to an Unhitched Horse had become the third one that got away for me as curator of European paintings at the TMA. He had listened intently, and I remembered like it was yesterday, he immediately stated something along the lines of, if I had known you felt that strongly about this picture, we could have put it on reserve to give us a chance to consider it. I then shocked him. I pushed back my chair, my beer only half consumed, totally out of character for me, bolted from our table, and I literally ran back to the dealer, Eric Cotelem's stand, to ask him to put the painting on reserve for us. The whirlwind of emotions continued. Cotelem said a private client had just put it on reserve, but that this person would let him know after driving back to Paris if he really wanted it. That evening, Cotelem sent me a text. To this day, I've kept it on my phone. That text reads, "It seems that you have a second chance. They buy something else. I keep Géricault for you until tomorrow morning. What a life, Eric." The next day, we officially requested the picture comes to Toledo, and by June, it was ours. Rah. As retired curator emeritus, I'm often asked what future projects I have up my sleeve. I would share, I have responded that for a handful of years, I have been cogitating putting together a small exhibition, say about 8 to 12 paintings, devoted to the rare French painter from Lyon, Antoine Bergeon, whose life dates are 1754 to 1843. It would be the first show ever to focus on this extremely talented and little-known master. You're looking at what are probably his two best works. At left, the enthralling still life with flowers, shells, and a shark's head in the collection of the Philadelphia Museum, which I know well from my years working there. And at right, the Louvre's extraordinarily subtle bouquet of lilies and roses in a basket placed on a chest of drawers, a work I never failed to take in when in Paris. The artist's striking vision and unusual compositional sensibilities are remarkably furtive and enchanting. I visited Lyon the autumn of 2005 to study the collection of the fine museum there, which not surprisingly has the largest holdings of anywhere of the works by Bergeon. And during my time in the city, I deliberately stopped by the art gallery of Michel Descours. He put me on his mailing list, and 9 years later, on October 17th, 2014, I received this catalog with a detail of a still life by Bergeon on the cover. I immediately called the dealer with the intent of putting a reserve on the painting, only to be saddened to learn that the work had already been sold on the opening week of the exhibition. To quote Alexander Pope, the 18th century English poet, "Hope springs eternal." 20 days later, dealer Descours telephoned me back to say that the picture had not been paid for, hence was still available, but would be only for 5 days, at which point he planned to bring the painting to a fair in Paris. I asked for a reserve on it all the same, hung up the phone, and began scheming how I possibly could make this acquisition happen quickly. The potential solution? A gift. The very next day, I contacted a potential donor, and the very next day after that, said potential donor gave me the go-ahead to engage the dealer. I updated the director, and I contacted the dealer, who agreed not to put the picture in a fair, as had been his plan. A little more than a month later, Bergeon's still life with grapes, chestnuts, melons, and a marble cube arrived in Toledo. And after enduring some hectic and rather befuddling internal bureaucracy, the TMA came into the ownership of this gem. I am proud and grateful to say that the credit line on the object label in the museum's Gallery 31, where the work of art is displayed, reads, "Purchased with funds given by Dr. and Mrs. James G. Raven." Quite hilariously, as an aside, I just have to share with you, and the dealer's a smart man, I still know him to this day, but initially in that catalog I showed you, he published this as "Still life with grapes, chestnuts, melons, and a sugar cube." When it was going to the walls, the art preparator said that is going to be one big cup of tea. Subsequently, the dealer found an inventory record after the artist's death listing 2 paintings, and it cited the marble cube and other paintings. I want to add that the Ravens have subsequently also made possible the acquisition of 2 further 19th century additions to the collection, reproductions of which you see here, the Belgian painters Alfred Staven's La Neige at left, and the museum's first 19th century Italian picture, Giovanni Battista Camuccini's Auricia, the Porta Napoletana with the Palazzo Chigi at right. Though I titled my lecture Acquisition Anecdotes of a TMA Curator of European Paintings, for 27 of my 28 years at the TMA, I proudly also was Curator of American Painting. While less active collecting in this domain, the museum did indeed make some strong acquisitions in this area during my years. It was always my aim to pair with the 1962 gift of Mr. and Mrs. Roy Reich, William Harnett's still life with the Toledo Blade of 1886, now shown on the screen, with a comparable still life by the other leading 19th century American painter of still lifes, John Frederick Peto, who you see here in a photograph from the 1880s. In November 2017, I encountered at the American Art Fair in New York, Peto's market basket, hat, and umbrella. So too, I also encountered at the fair John Wilmerding, the expert on Peto, and a professor I had in my undergraduate days in Hanover, New Hampshire. We spoke, engaged pleasantries, and then went our separate ways, visiting the stands of the numerous dealers. About half an hour later, after having seen 2 or 3 other works by Pito, while I was standing again in awe in front of this painting, Wilmerding tapped me on the shoulder and observed to his former student, "Now you are standing in front of the right Pito," and proceeded to wax eloquent about the canvas to me. By the following autumn, Brian Kennedy and I had found a way for the painting to enter this collection as another generous gift. The object label's credit line reads, "A gift to the museum in honor of Susan Palmer by her husband Thomas, daughter Emily, and her family." On the 18th of September, at a luncheon in honor of Susan, the museum gave her a straw hat to mark the occasion of the gift and a special birthday. I want now to tell you about my 2 longest purchase considerations. This is an excellent self-portrait in the collection of the Louvre by the Dutch painter Arie de Vos, who was active in the second half of the 17th century. De Vos's largest known painting, Pallas Athena and the 9 Muses, depicts the goddess of wisdom and patroness of the arts visiting the 9 Muses on Mount Helicon. I first laid eyes on De Vos's canvas in December 1994 at the gallery of a New York dealer. It was love at first sight. I next encountered Athena and her cohorts in March 1995 at TAFOF in Maastricht. The painting was displayed on the stand of a dealer from Munich. Methinks the object was jointly owned by a cluster of old master dealers on both sides of the Atlantic. I was no less overwhelmed, but circumstances were just not right at the time for my pushing for its purchase. Fast forward 4 more years to October 1999. I am in a different New York dealer's gallery, and there is De Vos's Pallas Athena and the 9 Muses once again, still impressive as can be, and then some. It was time to act, and I did just that. Within months, I had the painting brought to the museum for wider assessment. To my eyes, it looked stupendous. However, alas, I did not get the green light to proceed. Mary de Vos's painting departed, but the picture never, ever left my mind. In 2001, I learned that Athena and Company had been sold to a private collector. 14 years elapsed. I am still musing about them muses. So in 2015, I inquired of the New York dealer who had sold the canvas about its current status, whereabouts, and was told it was still with that private collector. Never, however, am I informed if the work is in Altoona, Athens, or Antarctica. Here is where the serendipity part comes in. On November 13th, 2017, I am announced at Sutton Place, New York City, the home of a college friend of a friend who I had not seen in the intervening 41 years. She had invited me and a handful of other curators to dinner. Punctual Larry was the first to arrive, and after I gawked at the vista of the East River, my hostess commenced to give me a tour of her small but noteworthy group of old master paintings. She brought me to her study. Immediate shock. I hear myself exclaiming, not in a low decibel, "So you are the one who cleverly acquired Arie de Vos's Pallas Athena and the 9 Muses." My tour guide hostess was absolutely astonished that I knew the artist and knew the painting. All she could do at this point was blurt, "Well, as you can see, it doesn't really fit over my couch in this small room. You seem so completely enamored by it, wouldn't you like to borrow it for display in Toledo?" Round 2. In the early spring 2018, the painting makes its return voyage to Toledo, this time for good. Though the agreement was ostensibly that it would be a long-term loan, I certainly had other plans. Over lunch with the owner at the New York Yacht Club on West 44th Street in late January 2020, I communicated the chance was real that the museum would purchase the painting if the price were palatable. Bless her heart, she made it so, and by March 2020, 26 years after I first laid eyes on the painting, it was awarded a TMA accession number. It only took 22 years to achieve this acquisition. I first relished Giuseppe Recco's Kitchen Interior with a Piglet, a captivating still life of a kind theretofore not in the TMA collection. The intense realism of 17th and 18th century Italian painting, Italian and Spanish painting, still life painting, on a visit to London in March of 1995. During my art market rounds that spring day in '95, I ventured to Trafalgar Gallery, where the proprietors Alfred and Ronald Cohen held shop. I was smitten. However, but a bit smidge more than 2 years into my TMA tenure, I reckoned it perhaps a mite too early to present such a challenging composition, shall we say, to the director's office, and so I held off. The Cohen brothers always told me it was a picture not to everyone's stomach. And Mr. Weinberg, a private collector of consequence in Zurich, the Cohens informed me, was infatuated with it for years and wanted to display it in his dining room. His wife, however, said, "No way." Suffice it to state that the picture had immense and intense staying power for me. Over the next 2 decades, during which time the picture remained available, I repeatedly studied the canvas on 6 subsequent occasions, when in London, the last time being February 2017. In the same month, on my recommendation, Brian Kennedy visited the dealers and emailed me straight away, all in caps, "Saw the painting, like it." In a phone conversation later the same day, Kennedy okayed my having it shipped to Toledo, where it arrived in June 2017. Prior to putting it on view to see how it held with the collection, he counseled that it required a judicious and sensitive label that provided contextual explanation, end quote. Indeed. On the morning of July 21, 2021, the day that the painting was initially available to our public during our test display, I deliberately lingered in the gallery to observe the reaction of its first visitor, whomever that would be. Unaware of my presence, much less my association with the museum, the individual exclaimed, "That's a damn good painting." The surreptitiously overheard positive remark would make its way to my subsequent written recommendation form. In the days and weeks after it was first trial exhibited, I purposely escorted many TMA colleagues to view Kitchen Interior with a Piglet in the gallery to learn their reactions to the painting. Remarked Adam Levine, then TMA Curator of Antiquity, "Congratulations on the Recco. It's not in the collection yet, but any work that looks that good next to Ribera ought to be." Remarked Joe Felix, Toledo Museum of Art chef. Sorry, wrong chef. Remarked Joe Felix, TMA chef, "Live, dead, and cooked. I love it. The upcoming generation is unaware of where food comes from. This shows that, and they will love it." At the October 2017 meeting, the Trustee Art Committee finally gave approval to the purchase, and guess who is showing a countenance of genuine satisfaction after a purchase consideration that he ruminated on for well over 2 decades. Why a recently slaughtered piglet suspended by its hind feet over a table on which a host of other dead or alive foodstuff motifs are to be seen, including a plucked chicken, 2 live young pigeons, a sausage, a provolone cheese, and a bottle of oil, olive oil. Why this specific conglomeration of motifs? Kitchen Interior with a Piglet very conceivably was understood, as it is to be understood, as a visual recipe reminiscent of today's farm-to-table movement. foodstuffs displayed being the ingredients required, meat in the form of pork, fowl, and cheese, to prepare a variant of pasticcio or timbalo, the savory or sweet dough pie at the right in Recco's painting. I share with you here the recipe for timbalo. And in the reception to commence shortly, I shall be dispensing to one and all who inquire of it from me the recipe for this delicacy. The first dinner invitation extended will be accepted with gratitude. Timbalo is, of course, the delicacy that featured, you may recollect, in the 1996 movie starring the now famous Stanley Tucci, Big Night. I conclude with one of my most satisfying acquisition searches and successes. In 1914, the TMA acquired its first painting by a Scandinavian artist, Silence Winter, painted that very year by the Swedish painter Gustav Weisstadt, now on the screen. It would be 8 decades before another painting by an artist from a Nordic country entered the museum's collection with the purchase, you will remember, of the Bay of Naples, painted by the Danish standout Købke, this curator emeritus's initial acquisition for the TMA in 1993, my first year at the museum. In the decades thereafter, paintings by 19th century French, Russian, English, American, Belgian, and Dutch painters have found their way, one way or another, to TMA walls. 2020 was my last full year at the TMA, but I certainly wasn't finished. I still was tenaciously targeting a finish painting. My goal was spurred on by the prodding and promised munificence of TMA patrons Mala and John Dooner, she Finnish by birth, who generously let it be known that they would provide funding for a finished painting for the collection. In February 2019, I conducted a 4-day research trip to splendidly snowy Finland to study the so-called Finnish golden age of painting, demarcated roughly by the years 1880 to 1910. Here's yours truly in front of the Turku Art Museum. This is the Sorlakius Museum in Manta, north of Tampere. At right, I am in storage with the curator. This is the central gallery of the Ateneum Art Museum, the Finnish National Gallery in Helsinki. And this is the wonderland I encountered at Villa Geilenberg, located on the outskirts of Helsinki, a former private home and now a museum. I also met with this dealer and also with another dealer and a private collector at his home. An expert on Finnish Golden Age painting I am not, but by the end of my Dead of Winter crash course, I had trained my eye to recognize the major artists and to know great from merely good, which is not good enough for the Toledo Museum of Art. One painter that attracted my eye was Ugo Simberg. A major protagonist of Finnish modernism, Simberg painted symbolist fantasies, often involving the image of death, inspired by Finnish folklore, in addition to portraits and landscapes. As one art historian has observed about Simberg's art, common to all his art was a quest to uncover a hidden plane of reality. Among the many works by him at the Finnish National Gallery, his Wounded Angel, a Finnish national icon, as it were, the composition known to every single Finn. In 2006, it was voted Finland's national painting, as well as this amazing self-portrait. There is the painting I'm talking about, front and center, in the central room of the National Gallery of Finland. To further engender offerings to the TMA, I notified the major auction houses of our ongoing search for a Finnish painting. Christie's in London, just for example, is dog-friendly. So later that year, when Alistair Plum, a Christie's London specialist in 19th century European art, gave me some advance notice that in their December 12th sale, there would be offered Hugo Sinberg's A Sea View of about 1907 to 17, which you see here at right in the image, the painting being in the center of the auction house's preview display. My antenna went up. The scene depicts a vista of Viborg Bay, which is located at the northeast end of the Gulf of Finland in the Baltic Sea. The red dot in the upper right of the map notes the approximate location. For almost his entire life, Sinberg spent his summers on the coast at Niemenlaute, the family's summer residence near Viipuri, which alas, since its capture in 1944 by the Soviet Union Army, is now part of Russia. The artist even built a studio facing the sea. The glittering light on the water and the convergence and the evergreen trees rising above the horizon line, as well as the symbolist features of the painting, such as the clouds and their extraordinary tails, the burnt down fire on the beach, and the enigmatic footprints in the foreground, all endow the composition with an air of mystery. I called the painting to the attention of Mala Dooner and her husband John, who expressed their interest. I went to London to examine the painting. I fell in love with it and told the Dooners. They entrusted me to bid on the picture. It was won for the TMA. And the object credit line reads, purchased with funds given by John and Mala Dooner. And here you see the late John Dooner and Mala with the painting. I began my remarks with a quote from the Bible. I end with the first two lines of the aphorisms by the ancient Greek physician Hippocrates, a pronouncement known best from the eloquent Latin translation. Ars longa, vita breva. Art is long, life is short. Thanks for your attention. And if you're not already, please consider becoming a member of the Toledo Museum of Art.
Well, I have a big mouth. Okay. All right. We have a few minutes for question and answer time. So do we have anybody raise their hand if they have any questions for Larry?
Yes, right in the center of the auditorium.
I'm a retired docent,
I know well.
but I love your story about the condo of Mary when it was first acquired, I think in 1941. You got the story from a magazine, do you remember?
Distinctly. She speaks of Pierre de Cosimo's, it was 1937, but
37, okay.
splitting hairs. Bought from Joseph Duveen. It's a 5-foot wide painting from the Italian Renaissance. I'll briefly just tell the account. Can you all hear me without the mic? Yes. Thank you, sir. It frame around it. And when I was doing homework to prepare for the interview to come here in the public library in Philadelphia, I went through every reference I could find to the TMA, and there was a Life magazine cover in '37, and inside there's a marvelous cover on that painting, cover of Life magazine. But briefly, there's an article on the side by the Curator that you're asking about, and a reporter comes to the TMA to do an article about the TMA docents, of which you wonderfully had been one, but not 1937, don't worry. And the cabbie bringing the journalist from, I guess, the railroad station to the museum says, "You're heading to the museum, what are you up to? And make sure you see the Piero de Cosimo, because here in Toledo, we know as much about Piero de Cosimo as we do Joe DiMaggio." I think that's what you wanted me to tell.
Any other questions? Larry, is it a very trusting community that they're sending these great works of art to Toledo to put on the wall to test it out? Is that very common?
Yes, it's very common, and
Okay.
it's done in trust. The moment a museum
Laura, just imagine if the TMA doesn't do right for whatever reason. Do I think any other dealer's ever going to lend us something up front? So we take extraordinary care on loan. But as an undergraduate professor always told me, art follows money. With dealers not doing this, they're not going to make sales. Now, I'm a curator I was with the words before 1900 in my title. In the modern era, meaning modern art, contemporary art, you got to buy it on the spot or it doesn't happen, generally. But in old master things, as you heard me say, sometimes things take a year, and that's tying up capital. So dealers aren't keen to have it go on forever, but when you play good cop, bad cop, as curator and director can and have done, you can buy time, and they can kind of read the tea leaves, and it's done on trust and responsibility of long-term relationships. That fellow in the warehouse with the fur hat had sold us something already, so he was willing to be patient. So that's how it happens.
Thank you.
I think that since we have another event going to be happening out there, we should go ahead and retire to conference rooms A and B. If you have any questions, you can ask Larry at that time. So you just exit out the doors and you'll immediately go to the right.